The Kipper File by David Eden, a psychological thriller. Chapter 1, Monday Morning. The telephone rang at Sturgis and Associates estate agents at precisely 9:47 a.m. on that gray Monday morning in July, cutting through the drowsy hum of another work week beginning in Fulham. Sarah Brightwell reached for it with one hand while stirring sugar into her coffee with the other, her mind still foggy from the weekend's wine and late-night television. Sturgis and Associates, Sarah speaking. How may I help you? The voice that answered was pleasant enough, cultured, well-spoken, the sort of accent that suggested private education and old money, the kind of voice that sold houses in this part of London like nobody's business. Good morning. I'm interested in viewing 37 Shorolds Road. I understand it's available for immediate viewing? Sarah fumbled for her appointment book, nearly knocking over her coffee in the process. Monday mornings were always chaos, but something about this call felt different. Maybe it was the way the man spoke, too precise, too measured, as if he were reading from a script. Yes, that's correct. It's a lovely 3-bedroom Victorian conversion. When would be convenient for you, Mr. Kipper, James Kipper. There was a pause, just long enough to make Sarah glance at the receiver. Today would be ideal, if possible. Say 12:30. Sarah checked her schedule. Emma Hartwell was free this afternoon, their newest agent, eager and ambitious, the sort who'd jump at any chance to prove herself. Fresh out of university, with a business degree and dreams of making it big in London property. The girl reminded Sarah of herself 15 years ago, before the job had worn down her optimism like water on stone. I can arrange that, Mr. Kipper. Our agent, Emma Hartwell, will meet you at the property at 12:30. She's excellent. You'll be in very capable hands. I'm sure I will be. Again, that odd pause. She sounds perfect. Something in his tone made Sarah's skin prickle, though she couldn't say why. She'd been in this business long enough to read people, and there was something about Mr. Kipper that didn't quite fit. Too eager, perhaps. Too specific about the timing. Shall I take your contact details, Mr. Kipper, in case we need to reschedule? That won't be necessary. I'll be there, 12:30 sharp. Thank you for your assistance, Sarah. The line went dead before she could respond. Sarah stared at the receiver for a moment, disturbed by the way he'd used her name at the end. She hadn't given it to him, only mentioned it in her greeting. Most clients forgot names immediately, too focused on square footage and asking prices to pay attention to the person helping them. She made a note in the appointment book. J. Kipper, 37 Shorolds Road, 12:30 p.m., Emma H. Her handwriting looked shaky, though her hands felt steady enough. Emma arrived at the office 20 minutes later, her blonde hair still damp from the morning drizzle. She was 24, bright-eyed, and possessed of the kind of infectious enthusiasm that made even the dingiest bedsits sound like palaces. Sarah had hired her 3 months ago, and she'd already proven herself a natural saleswoman. Morning, Sarah. Lovely weather for ducks, isn't it? Emma shook the rain from her coat and hung it on the stand by the door. Anything interesting in the diary today? Sarah hesitated for a moment, her pen hovering over the appointment book. Something was nagging at her. Some instinct honed by years of dealing with time-wasters and dreamers and the occasional genuinely dangerous individual who wandered into their pristine office world. Actually, yes, you've got a viewing at 12:30, 37 Shorolds Road. Client called himself James Kipper. Emma's face lit up. Brilliant. I love that property. The period features are gorgeous. Did he sound keen? Very. Sarah closed the appointment book with more force than necessary. Emma, love, just be careful, would you? Something about the call felt off. Emma laughed, the sound bright and careless in the morning quiet. You worry too much, Sarah. What's the worst that could happen? It's broad daylight, busy street, nice neighborhood. I'll be fine. Sarah nodded, but the unease remained, settling in her stomach like a stone. Outside, the July rain continued to fall, turning the London streets dark and slick. Somewhere in the city, a man named James Kipper was waiting for 12:30 to arrive. And Emma Hartwell had no idea that she had just scheduled her own disappearance. Chapter 2. The Watcher, Detective Inspector. Michael Thornbury had been walking the same beat in Fulham for 8 years, and he'd developed what his wife called the copper's curse, the ability to spot trouble before it announced itself. It was a sixth sense that had served him well, keeping him alive through 2 knife attacks and one particularly unpleasant encounter with a cricket bat-wielding burglar in Parsons Green. This morning, that familiar itch was scratching at the back of his brain as he stood outside the newsagent on Fulham Road, ostensibly buying cigarettes, but actually watching the flow of pedestrians with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned that evil rarely looked the part. The man who caught his attention wasn't doing anything wrong, exactly. He was simply standing across the street, partially concealed by the awning of a dry cleaner's shop, watching the entrance to Sturgis and Associates estate agents with an intensity that made Thornbury's teeth ache. Average height, average build, wearing a dark overcoat despite the July warmth. The kind of man you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him, which in Thornbury's experience made him the most dangerous kind of all. Thornbury had been a policeman long enough to know the difference between casual interest and predatory observation. This was definitely the latter. The man had been there for over an hour, checking his watch every few minutes with the precision of someone operating on a schedule. Twice, he'd started toward the estate agent's office, only to turn back at the last moment, as if rehearsing his approach. It was the behavior of someone building up courage for something they shouldn't be doing. "Excuse me, sir?" Thornbury crossed the street with the unhurried confidence of authority, his warrant card already in his hand. The man turned, and for just a moment, the detective caught a glimpse of something cold and calculating in his pale blue eyes before a mask of polite confusion slipped into place. "Yes, officer? Is there a problem?" The voice was educated, pleasant, completely unremarkable, but Thornbury had learned to listen beyond words, and underneath the civility was something else, a barely contained excitement, like a child anticipating Christmas morning. "Routine inquiry, sir. Could I have your name?" "James Kipper." The answer came without hesitation, but Thornbury noticed how the man's left hand had moved instinctively toward his coat pocket before stopping. "Is something wrong?" "Just wondering what brings you to this particular street corner, Mr. Kipper. You've been here quite some time." Kipper's smile was perfect, not too wide, not too brief, exactly what you'd expect from an innocent man trying to be helpful. But his eyes remained cold, reptilian in their calculation. "I have an appointment at the estate agent's, 12:30. I arrived early and was simply gathering my thoughts. Big decision, buying a house. I'm sure you understand." Thornbury nodded, though something about the explanation felt rehearsed. "Which property are you viewing?" 37 Shorrold's Road, lovely Victorian conversion, according to the advertisement. That was specific enough to be true, but Thornbury's instincts were still screaming. He'd been a policeman for 15 years, and in that time he'd learned that the most dangerous criminals were often the most ordinary-looking ones. The rapists and murderers who slipped through society's cracks were rarely the wild-eyed maniacs of tabloid headlines. They were the quiet neighbors, the polite strangers, the men who said please and thank you while planning unspeakable things. "Well then, Mr. Kipper, I hope your viewing goes well. Lovely area, Shorrold's Road. I'm certain it will be educational." There it was again, that undercurrent of excitement, like a man savoring a private joke. Thornbury made a mental note to check with the estate agent later, just to satisfy his curiosity. In his experience, it never hurt to follow up on a feeling, especially when it seemed like nothing at all. Kipper checked his watch once more. "I should be going. Don't want to keep the young lady waiting." The way he said "young lady" made Thornbury's skin crawl, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly why. There was something proprietary about it, as if Kipper already considered himself entitled to something that wasn't his to claim. "Of course. Good day, Mr. Kipper." Thornbury watched the man walk away, noting the measured pace, the way he kept his hands in his pockets, the slight hunch of his shoulders that suggested someone carrying more than just keys and loose change. At the corner, Kipper turned back briefly, and their eyes met across the busy street. The smile Kipper gave him was perfectly pleasant and absolutely terrifying. After he disappeared into the crowd, Thornbury remained on the street corner for another 10 minutes, unable to shake the feeling that he'd just encountered something genuinely evil dressed up in human skin. He'd met murderers before, had even arrested a few. But this was different. This felt like looking into the eyes of something that viewed other human beings as toys to be played with and discarded. He glanced at his watch. 12:25 p.m. Somewhere in Fulham, a young estate agent named Emma Hartwell was about to meet a man who had been planning this moment with the careful attention of a predator studying its prey. And Detective Inspector Michael Thornbury had just let him walk away into the gray London afternoon, carrying with him all the accumulated malice of a mind that had crossed lines normal people couldn't even imagine. Chapter 3. The Appointment. Emma Hartwell pulled her white Ford Fiesta into a parking space 3 doors down from 37 Shorolds Road and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Professional but approachable, that was the image she'd cultivated since joining Sturgis and Associates. Lipstick neither too bright nor too subtle, hairstyled but not overdone, the sort of appearance that said trustworthy to nervous first-time buyers and competent to seasoned investors. The Victorian conversion stood like a dowager empress among its neighbors, all red brick and white trim, with the kind of period features that made buyers' hearts race and their bank accounts weep. Emma had viewed the property twice during her first week on the job, memorizing every selling point from the restored cornicing to the modern kitchen extension. It was exactly the sort of property that sold itself if you could get the client through the front door. She gathered her briefcase and house keys, then paused. Sarah's warning from that morning echoed in her mind, carried on a whisper of unease she couldn't quite dismiss. But the street was busy with the usual Monday afternoon traffic, mothers pushing prams toward the nearby primary school, businessmen hurrying back from lunch. Nothing threatening about broad daylight in one of London's nicer neighborhoods. Emma checked her watch. 12:29 p.m. Mr. Kipper would be along any moment. The man who approached her as she stood outside number 37 was exactly what she'd expected from his voice. Middle-aged, well-dressed, unremarkable in the way that suggested old money and good breeding. His overcoat was expensive but understated, his shoes polished to a military shine. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Miss Hartwell, I presume?" "That's right. Mr. Kipper?" She extended her hand with a practiced smile. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, lasting exactly the appropriate length of time. Everything about him screamed respectability, yet something deep in Emma's lizard brain was sending up warning flares. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I do hope I'm not inconveniencing you." "Not at all. It's a lovely property. I'm sure you'll be impressed." As she fumbled with the keys, Emma became aware that Kipper was standing closer than strictly necessary, close enough that she could smell his aftershave, something expensive and subtle that reminded her of her father's study. But underneath it was something else, something that made her think of the Natural History Museum's preservation rooms, where dead things were kept in perpetual stasis. "After you," he said, gesturing toward the open door. The entrance hall was everything the brochure promised. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, the kind of architectural details that modern builders couldn't replicate if they tried. Emma launched into her practiced presentation, pointing out the period features while mentally calculating commission rates. A quick sale would put her well ahead of her monthly targets. The current owners have maintained the Victorian character while updating all the essential systems, she explained, leading him toward the sitting room. Central heating, modern wiring, updated plumbing. You get the charm without the headaches. Kipper nodded appreciatively, but Emma noticed he wasn't really looking at the house. He was looking at her, not obviously, not crudely, but with the focused attention of someone memorizing details. It was the sort of gaze that made her skin feel tight, as if her personal space had suddenly shrunk to nothing. "The kitchen is through here," she continued, hoping her voice didn't betray her growing discomfort. "Fully fitted, granite worktops, all appliances included in the asking price." "Impressive." Kipper ran his fingers along the counter edge, and Emma found herself stepping back involuntarily. "Tell me, Miss Hartwell, do you live alone?" The question came so naturally, delivered in such a conversational tone, that for a moment Emma didn't register its inappropriateness. When she did, her blood turned to ice water. "I'm sorry? Forgive me." I only meant to ask if you understand the appeal of a property like this for someone in my situation. A single man, no family obligations, looking for a place to entertain. The explanation was reasonable enough, but the way he'd paused before entertain made Emma's mouth go dry. She forced herself to maintain her professional demeanor while her instincts screamed at her to run. Of course, the layout is perfect for entertaining. Shall we look at the upstairs? Oh, yes, Kipper said, and his smile was the sort that never quite reached the eyes. I'm particularly interested in the bedrooms. Emma started toward the stairs, acutely aware of Kipper following behind her. The house suddenly felt different, too quiet, too isolated, despite the traffic passing outside. The Victorian conversion that had seemed charming 5 minutes ago now felt like a trap, all narrow hallways and locked doors and windows that looked out onto nothing but empty gardens. As they climbed the stairs, Emma's mobile phone buzzed in her pocket. Sarah checking up on her, probably, or maybe a new client inquiry. She should answer it, make some excuse about needing to take an important call. But something about the way Kipper was watching her, something about the careful patience in his manner, suggested that any deviation from his script would be. The master bedroom is at the front of the house, she said, her voice sounding hollow in the narrow hallway. Lovely period features, original fireplace, plenty of natural light. Perfect, Kipper murmured, so close behind her that she could feel his breath on her neck. Absolutely perfect. Emma reached for the bedroom door handle, and in that moment she understood with crystalline clarity that she'd made a terrible mistake. Whatever James Kipper had planned for this afternoon, it had nothing to do with buying property, and everything to do with the reason her skin was crawling and her hands were shaking, and every instinct she possessed was telling her to run now, before it was too late. But the door was already opening, and Kipper's hand was already moving towards something in his coat pocket. And outside, 37 Shorolds Road, the world continued its normal Monday afternoon business, completely unaware that Emma Hartwell was about to disappear from it forever. Chapter 4. Gone. Sarah Brightwell glanced at the office clock for the 15th time in 10 minutes. 2:47 p.m. Emma should have been back by now. The viewing at Shorolds Road was scheduled for 12:30, and even allowing for an enthusiastic client and detailed questions about mortgage arrangements, 90 minutes was pushing it for a simple house showing. She picked up the phone and dialed Emma's mobile for the 3rd time. It went straight to voicemail, that cheerful recorded voice promising to return calls as soon as possible. Sarah had already left 2 messages. A third would border on harassment. But the knot in her stomach was tightening with each passing minute, fed by memories of that morning's phone call and the wrongness she'd sensed in James Kipper's too careful voice. The office felt different without Emma's bright chatter filling the spaces between phone calls. Too quiet, too sterile, like a waiting room in a hospital where the news was never good. Sarah found herself staring at Emma's desk, neat as always, her diary open to today's appointments, a half-finished cup of coffee growing cold beside her computer keyboard. At 3 o'clock, Sarah called the property directly. Sometimes clients changed their minds about timing, decided to extend viewings, asked to see other properties in the area. It happened. Not often, but it happened. The phone rang 8 times before an elderly woman answered, her voice sharp with the irritation of someone whose afternoon television had been interrupted. Yes, what is it? I'm terribly sorry to bother you. This is Sarah Brightwell from Sturgis and Associates. We had a viewing scheduled at 37 Shorolds Road today at 12:30. I was just checking to see if everything went smoothly. Silence stretched across the line, filled with the background noise of a game show and the distant sound of traffic. There's been no viewing here today, love. No one's been near the place since the weekend. Are you sure you've got the right address? Sarah's blood turned to slush. Yes, I'm certain. 37 Shorolds Road, Victorian conversion, 3 bedrooms? That's next door, dear, number 39. This is 37, and I've been here all day. Trust me, I'd have noticed strangers tramping about the garden. The phone slipped in Sarah's suddenly sweaty palm. Are you absolutely certain? A young blonde woman, mid-20s, would have arrived around 12:30 with a client? Not here, love. You might want to try next door, but I think the Hendersons are away this week, Majorca or somewhere." Sarah thanked the woman and hung up, her mind racing through possibilities that all led to the same terrifying conclusion. Wrong address. Emma had gone to the wrong property, or been directed to the wrong property, or James Kipper had never intended to view any property at all. She called the police at 3:17 p.m., her hands shaking as she dialed 999. The operator was professionally calm, asking questions Sarah couldn't answer. When had she last seen Emma? Had there been any recent threats? Any reason to believe Emma might have left voluntarily? "She's 24 years old," Sarah found herself saying, as if age were a defense against evil. "She's sensible, responsible. She'd never just disappear without calling in. Something's happened to her." Detective Inspector Michael Thornbury arrived at the office 43 minutes later, his face grim with the expression of a man who'd hoped his morning instincts were wrong. Sarah recognized him immediately. She'd seen him around the neighborhood, one of those coppers who actually walked a beat instead of hiding in patrol cars. "You're the lady who reported the missing estate agent?" "Emma Hartwell. She left here this morning for a 12:30 appointment and never came back. I've been calling her mobile all afternoon. It goes straight to voicemail." Thornbury pulled out his notebook, the movement economical and practiced. "Tell me about this appointment. Who was the client?" "James Kipper. He called this morning around 9:45, wanted to view 37 Shorolds Road. Except," Sarah's voice caught, "except I just called that address, and the woman who answered said no one's been there today. The property he claimed to want to see is next door at number 39, and those owners are away." Something shifted in Thornbury's expression, a tightening around his eyes that suggested unpleasant recognition. "James Kipper, you said?" "Yes. Do you know him?" Thornbury didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked for a description of Emma: height, weight, hair color, what she'd been wearing. Sarah provided what details she could, her voice growing smaller with each question. "I spoke to a man this morning," Thornbury said finally. "Called himself James Kipper. He was watching your office from across the street for over an hour before the appointment time." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "Watching the office? Why didn't you?" "He wasn't breaking any laws, said he had an appointment, was just gathering his thoughts. I had a feeling about him, but feelings aren't evidence." Sarah sank into her chair, the weight of realization crushing down on her. "I sent her to meet him. I could have gone myself, or suggested he come here first, or... Oh God, what have I done?" "You did nothing wrong," Thornbury said, but his voice carried the hollow comfort of words that couldn't change anything. "Tell me exactly what this Kipper said on the phone. Every detail you can remember." As Sarah recounted the morning's conversation, Thornbury took careful notes. When she mentioned Kipper's use of her name at the end of the call, his pen stopped moving. "He called you by name? You're certain?" "Positive. Said thank you for your assistance, Sarah, just before he rang off. I remember thinking it was odd. I'd only mentioned my name in the greeting." Thornbury closed his notebook with a snap that sounded like a bone breaking. "Mrs. Brightwell, I need you to understand something. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. Whoever called you this morning had been planning this. He knew your name. He'd researched the property listings. He'd chosen his target carefully." "His target?" The words came out as a whisper. Emma was never meant to come back from that appointment. Outside, the July afternoon was sliding toward evening, and somewhere in London, a young woman had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed at all. The only traces left behind were a cold cup of coffee on a desk, an appointment book entry in Sarah's shaky handwriting, and the growing certainty that James Kipper was a name that would haunt them all for years to come. In his coat pocket, Thornbury's radio crackled to life with reports of an abandoned white Ford Fiesta found 3 streets away from Shorolds Road, its doors unlocked and keys missing. The hunt for Emma Hartwell was about to begin, but even then, in those first desperate hours, everyone involved understood they were looking for a ghost. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. Detective Chief Inspector Patricia Henley had been investigating missing persons cases for 12 years, and she'd learned to read the signs in those first crucial hours. The signs that told you whether someone had chosen to disappear or whether something unspeakable had been done to them. Emma Hartwell's case screamed the latter from every detail. The incident room at Fulham Police Station buzzed with controlled urgency as Henley spread crime scene photographs across the conference table. Emma's abandoned Fiesta sat in the images like an accusation. Doors unlocked, handbag gone, keys missing, but no signs of struggle. Too clean, too careful, the work of someone who understood evidence. Vehicle was found on Putney Bridge Road, approximately 400 meters from the last known location. Detective Sergeant Colin Matthews reported, his Lancashire accent thick with exhaustion. They'd been at this for 6 hours straight, following leads that went nowhere and asking questions that had no answers. CCTV from the nearby shops shows it was parked there at 1:23 p.m. Before that, nothing. Henley studied the timeline board, where Emma's last known movements were mapped out in black marker. 12:15 p.m., left the office. 12:30 p.m., scheduled appointment with James Kipper. 1:23 p.m., car abandoned. Somewhere in that 73-minute window, a young woman had vanished from the face of the earth. What about door-to-door inquiries around Shorrold's Road? 12 houses canvassed so far. Matthews consulted his notes. Most residents were at work during the relevant time. Mrs. Ethel Crenshaw at number 41 reported seeing a woman matching Emma's description walking toward number 37 around 12:30, but she was watching from her kitchen window and couldn't see much detail. Any description of the man she was with? Dark overcoat, average height, nothing distinctive. Mrs. Crenshaw's eyesight isn't what it used to be. Henley felt the familiar frustration of a case where every lead dissolved like sugar in rain. But one detail nagged at her, something Detective Inspector Thornbury had mentioned during his initial report. This James Kipper character, Thornbury spoke to him on the street that morning. Get me everything we have on that conversation. Thornbury appeared in the doorway as if summoned, looking haggard and carrying a manila folder thick with papers. Gov, I've been thinking about that encounter all day. There was something about him. Sit down, Mike. Tell me everything again, from the beginning. Thornbury settled into a chair and opened his folder, revealing pages of handwritten notes and what looked like a rough sketch. He was watching the estate agent's office from approximately 9:30 a.m. I observed him for over an hour before approaching. He gave his name as James Kipper without hesitation, claimed to have a viewing appointment at 12:30. But he was rehearsing. I watched him start toward the office twice, then turn back, like he was practicing his approach, and when I spoke to him, Thornbury paused, searching for words. He was excited, not nervous like you'd expect from an innocent man being questioned by police. Excited, like he was enjoying himself. Henley studied the sketch, a generic face that could have belonged to half the men in London. Average features, unremarkable in every way except for the eyes, which Thornbury had drawn with an unsettling intensity. You think this was planned? I know it was. He knew the estate agent's name, called her Sarah at the end of the phone conversation, though she'd only given her first name in the greeting. He'd researched the property listings, knew enough about 37 Shorrold's Road to sound legitimate, but he gave the wrong address on purpose. To isolate Emma. Exactly. Number 37 is occupied, number 39 is empty, with the owners away. He lured her to a location where no one would hear her scream. The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. Henley had worked enough abduction cases to know they were probably already too late. Statistics were brutally clear. If Emma Hartwell wasn't found within the first 24 hours, the chances of finding her alive dropped to virtually zero. What about the name? Detective Sergeant Rebecca Flynn spoke from her position at the computer terminal, where she'd been running database searches for the past 3 hours. James Kipper doesn't exist. No record of anyone by that name in the area. No credit history, no national insurance number, nothing. Alias. Has to be, and a carefully chosen one. I've been thinking about it. Why Kipper? It's not a common surname, easy to remember but unusual enough to stand out. Henley frowned. What are you thinking? It's too perfect, like he wanted us to remember it, like he's playing a game and we're just figuring out the rules. Before anyone could respond, The phone rang. Flynn answered, listened for a moment, then looked up with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "Gov, that was the lab. They found something in Emma's car." "What kind of something?" "A business card wedged under the passenger seat. High-quality cardstock, expensive printing. It says J. Kipper, property consultant, with a phone number." Henley felt her pulse quicken. "Please tell me someone's already called that number." "Deadline. Has been for months, according to BT. But here's the interesting part. The number was registered to a James Kipling, not Kipper. Address in Wimbledon." Jesus Christ. Henley was already reaching for her coat. "Matthews, Flynn, you're with me. Thornberry, coordinate with forensics on the car. I want every fiber, every fingerprint, every molecule of DNA they can pull from that vehicle." As they prepared to leave, Flynn looked up from her computer screen with a troubled expression. "Gov, there's something else. I ran a search on unsolved missing persons cases with similar patterns. Young women, professional settings, mysterious appointments with men using unusual names. How many hits? 7, spanning the last 3 years, all across southern England. Different police jurisdictions, so no one made the connection before." The number hit Henley like a physical blow. 7 other women. 7 other families destroyed by whatever monster was hiding behind the name James Kipper. Different names each time? J. Carpenter in Brighton, J. Carver in Canterbury, J. Cutler in Portsmouth. Flynn's voice grew smaller with each name. Always the same initial, always surnames that could be interpreted as tools. Henley understood immediately, and the realization made her stomach turn. Kipper, Carpenter, Carver, Cutler, all names that suggested cutting, shaping, working with hands. The killer was signing his work, leaving breadcrumbs for anyone clever enough to follow the pattern. "He's been doing this for years," she said quietly, "and Emma Hartwell is just his latest trophy." Outside, the London evening was settling into dusk, and somewhere in the sprawling city, a predator who called himself by many names was probably already planning his next move. The hunt for Emma had become something much larger, a race to stop a serial killer who had been hiding in plain sight, using the very ordinariness of his appearance to move through society like a shark through dark water. Chapter 6. The House in Wimbledon. The house at 42 Thornfield Avenue stood like a monument to middle-class respectability, its Tudor Revival facade and manicured garden indistinguishable from dozens of others in this quiet Wimbledon suburb. Detective Chief Inspector Henley sat in the unmarked car across the street, studying the property through binoculars while her team prepared for what might be their first real breakthrough in the Emma Hartwell case. Registered owner is one James Kipling, aged 43, occupation listed as property consultant. D.S. Matthews reported from the passenger seat, reading from a thick file folder. Purchased the house 18 months ago with cash. No mortgage, no financial records we can trace easily. It's like he materialized from nowhere with a briefcase full of money. The house looked empty. No lights visible despite the gathering dusk. No car in the driveway, curtains drawn tight against prying eyes. But Henley had learned not to trust appearances, especially when dealing with someone clever enough to operate under multiple identities for years without detection. "Armed response unit in position?" she asked into her radio. "Affirmative. Standing by for your signal." Henley lowered the binoculars and checked her watch. 7:34 p.m. Nearly 8 hours since Emma Hartwell had disappeared, and every minute that passed reduced their chances of finding her alive. But something about this house felt wrong. Too quiet, too perfect, like a stage set waiting for actors who would never arrive. "Flynn, what did the neighbors tell you?" D.S. Flynn consulted her notes, her usually steady voice betraying traces of unease. Kept to himself, polite but distant. Mrs. Patterson next door said he traveled frequently for business, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. No visitors, no parties, no disturbances. The perfect neighbor, according to everyone I spoke to. "Which makes him the perfect psychopath," Henley muttered. "All right, let's do this. Remember, we're looking for Emma first, evidence second. If she's in there, time is everything." They approached the house with tactical precision, armed officers covering the exits, while Henley's team prepared to breach the front door. The warrant had come through 20 minutes earlier, signed by a magistrate who'd taken one look at the pattern of disappearances and expedited the paperwork with unusual speed. The front door opened to Henley's knock, unlocked, swinging inward with a soft creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the suburban quiet. Inside, the house was dark and smelled of cleaning products and something else, something organic and unpleasant that made Henley's stomach clench with dread. "Police! James Kipling, if you're present, identify yourself." Silence. The kind of complete oppressive silence that suggested empty rooms and absent occupants. But as they moved through the ground floor, switching on lights and clearing each room systematically, it became obvious that James Kipling, or whoever he really was, had left in a hurry. The kitchen was immaculate, except for a single coffee cup in the sink, still warm to the touch. Upstairs, the master bedroom showed signs of hasty packing, empty hangers in the wardrobe, drawers pulled out and not quite pushed back in, the faint outline of a suitcase impression on the unmade bed. "Gov, you need to see this." Matthew's voice came from the basement, carrying a note of barely controlled horror that made Henley's blood run cold. She descended the narrow stairs, each step taking her deeper into a smell that she now recognized with sick certainty, the smell of death and decomposition and things that shouldn't exist in civilized society. The basement had been converted into something between a workshop and a shrine. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all showing young women. Some were clearly surveillance photos, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Others were more intimate, closer, taken in circumstances that suggested the subjects had no idea they were being photographed. But it was the center of the room that made Henley's legs go weak. A wooden table, stained dark with substances she didn't want to identify, restraints built into the surface, tools arranged with surgical precision on a nearby bench, not the crude implements of a madman, but expensive, professional equipment that spoke of planning patients and a mind that had thought about this for a very long time. "Jesus Christ," Flynn whispered from behind her. "How many were there?" Henley forced herself to examine the photographs more closely, looking for faces she might recognize from missing persons reports. Emma Hartwell's picture wasn't among them yet, but she counted at least 15 different women, all young, all blonde, all bearing a superficial resemblance to each other. "He has a type," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And he's been doing this a lot longer than we thought." Matthews had moved to a filing cabinet in the corner and was pulling out folders with the methodical determination of a man trying not to think about what he was finding. Detailed records on each victim. Names, addresses, daily routines, places of work. He stalked them for months before making contact. Henley opened one of the files at random and immediately wished she hadn't. The woman in the photographs was Sarah Chen, a dental receptionist from Croydon who disappeared 14 months earlier. Page after page documented her life in obsessive detail: what time she left for work, which route she took home, where she shopped for groceries, even what she ordered at her local cafe. "He studied them like specimens," she said. "Learned everything about their lives before he destroyed them. There's something else." Flynn had found another door, hidden behind a bookshelf that swung open on well-oiled hinges. "Gov, this is worse." The hidden room was smaller, more intimate, and infinitely more terrifying. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, missing person reports, police appeals, family statements. He'd collected them all, mounted them like trophies, annotated them with his own commentary in neat, precise handwriting. And in the center of the room, on a small wooden desk, sat a computer that was still warm. "He was here recently," Henley said, moving to the machine. "Maybe minutes before we arrived." The screen was still active, showing what looked like a word processing document. As Henley read the first few lines, her blood turned to ice water. "My dear Detective Chief Inspector Henley, yes, I know who you are. I've been watching the investigation with great interest, and I must say I'm impressed by your deductive abilities. You've connected the patterns faster than I expected, though not quite fast enough to save poor Emma. By the time you read this, I'll be long gone, of course. But don't despair. I've left you a gift. Emma is still alive, though I'm afraid her situation is becoming rather urgent. You have until midnight to find her. After that, well, let's just say she'll join the others in a more permanent way. The clues are all there, Inspector. You simply need to think like me." Where would a man called Kipper take his catch? Where does one go to clean fish? Time is running out. Your devoted admirer, J.K. Henley stared at the screen, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. He'd been watching them, following their investigation in real time. He knew they'd found the house, had probably been monitoring police communications. This wasn't just a serial killer. This was a predator who treated murder like a game and law enforcement like unwitting players in his twisted entertainment. "Forensics team, now," she barked into her radio. "I want every inch of this place processed, and get me a tech specialist down here immediately. This computer might be our only link to finding Emma before it's too late." Outside, the Wimbledon evening was settling into full darkness, and somewhere in London, a clock was ticking toward midnight. Emma Hartwell was still alive, but only for as long as it took them to solve James Kipper's final, deadly riddle. Chapter 7. The fisherman's secret detective Chief Inspector Henley stood in the incident room at 10:47 p.m., staring at a map of London covered in red pins, while her team threw out increasingly desperate theories about James Kipper's riddle. Where does one go to clean fish? The question echoed in her mind like a taunt, each passing minute bringing them closer to midnight and whatever fate awaited Emma Hartwell. "Fish markets," D.S. Matthews said for the third time, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting into phones. "We've checked Billingsgate, Borough Market, every fishmonger from here to Greenwich. Nothing." "Fishing clubs?" suggested D.C. Walsh, a young constable who'd been pulled in from traffic duty to help with the search. "Thames Angling Society, London Fly Fishers." "Already checked," Flynn interrupted, not looking up from her computer screen. 23 registered fishing organizations in the Greater London area. 12 have premises that could conceivably be used to clean fish. All have been searched. Henley felt time slipping away like water through her fingers. They'd mobilized every available officer, coordinated with 4 different boroughs, even brought in specialist teams with ground-penetrating radar. But London was vast, and a man who'd spent years planning the perfect crime could hide a victim anywhere in its sprawling maze of buildings and tunnels and forgotten spaces. The computer specialist, a thin young man named Dr. Pettigrew, looked up from Kipper's machine with frustration written across his face. "He's good, this one. Professional-grade encryption, multiple proxy servers, the works. He's been using this computer for months, but everything's locked down tight. I can see he was accessing CCTV feeds, police databases, even internal communications. He's been watching you watch him. Can you trace where he's been accessing from?" "That's just it. The signals are bouncing all over London. Coffee shops, internet cafes, even some private residences that probably don't know their Wi-Fi's been compromised. He never stays in one place long enough to triangulate." Henley closed her eyes, trying to think like a killer. Kipper wasn't just intelligent, he was theatrical, someone who enjoyed the performance aspect of his crimes. The riddle wasn't random. It meant something specific to him, something that would seem obvious once they figured it out. "Tell me about the name again," she said suddenly. "Kipper. Why that particular alias?" Flynn pulled up her research files. It's a method of preserving fish, smoking and salting. But also, historically, it refers to male salmon during spawning season. The fish develop hooked jaws and become extremely aggressive, sometimes killing other salmon to protect their territory. The words hung in the air like a revelation. Henley felt something click into place, a pattern emerging from the chaos of clues and false leads. "He's not talking about cleaning fish," she said slowly. "He's talking about becoming one, a kipper, a predator." "I don't follow, Gov." Henley moved to the map, her finger tracing the Thames as it wound through central London. "Think about it. Where does a salmon go to spawn? Back to where it was born, back to its origins." She grabbed the phone and dialed the communications center. "I need everything you have on James Kipling's background. Education, employment history, family connections. Go back to childhood if you have to." While they waited, Henley studied the timeline of disappearances again. Brighton, Canterbury, Portsmouth, and now London, but not random locations. They followed a pattern, moving steadily toward the capital like a predator returning to familiar hunting grounds. The phone rang at 11:23 p.m. "We found something," the voice on the other end said. "James Kipling. Real name Jonathan David Kipling, former pupil at Dulwich College, but before that, primary education at a place called St. Bartholomew's Church School in Rotherhithe. School closed down in 1998 following a scandal involving the headmaster. Henley's pulse quickened. What kind of scandal? Abuse allegations, physical and sexual. Several pupils came forward, but the case was quietly settled out of court. The building's been empty ever since, too many bad memories for anyone to want to redevelop it. Address? Fish Wharf Lane, Rotherhithe, right on the Thames. The irony was so perfect it made Henley's skin crawl. Fish Wharf Lane, where one goes to clean fish. Kipper had been leading them to his childhood school all along, the place where his own innocence had been destroyed and his transformation into a monster had begun. All units, converge on Fish Wharf Lane, Rotherhithe, she barked into her radio. Armed response, ambulance, fire service. I want everything we have. And someone get me the building plans for St. Bartholomew's School. The convoy of police vehicles raced through South London at speeds that would have been reckless under any other circumstances. Henley sat in the passenger seat of the lead car, watching the clock on the dashboard. 11:41 p.m. 19 minutes until midnight. 19 minutes until James Kipper's deadline expired, and Emma Hartwell joined the ranks of the disappeared. St. Bartholomew's stood at the end of Fish Wharf Lane like a Gothic accusation, its Victorian brick and stone facade blackened by decades of neglect. Broken windows stared down at them like dead eyes, and the playground was overgrown with weeds that had pushed through the tarmac like grasping fingers. It was the sort of place where childhood dreams went to die, where innocence was murdered in classrooms that should have been sanctuaries. Buildings structurally sound, according to the council records, Matthews reported as they established a perimeter. 3 floors plus basement, multiple exit points, but most have been bricked up over the years. Henley studied the building plans by flashlight, looking for the most likely location where Kipper might have taken Emma. The basement seemed obvious, but obvious was what he'd expect them to think. He was playing a game, and games had rules. The headmaster's office, she said suddenly. Where would that have been? 3rd floor, according to these plans, corner room overlooking the Thames. Of course, the seat of power, the place where a young Jonathan Kipling's life had been destroyed. He'd brought Emma to the scene of his own trauma, completing some twisted circle of revenge that only made sense in his damaged mind. They moved through the abandoned school like ghosts, their flashlight beams cutting through darkness that seemed thick enough to touch. The corridors still smelled of chalk and disinfectant, and something else, the lingering psychic residue of fear and pain that soaked into the very walls. The headmaster's office door stood ajar, and from within came the sound Henley had been both hoping for and dreading, the soft, irregular breathing of someone fighting to stay alive. Emma Hartwell lay on what had once been the headmaster's desk, her wrists and ankles bound with professional restraints, a gag across her mouth, but her eyes wide and alert, alive, battered and terrified, but alive. But as they rushed to free her, Henley noticed something that made her blood freeze. A digital timer on the wall, its red numbers counting down. 11 fifth Bosel. Bomb disposal! She screamed into her radio. Clear the building! Everyone out! Now! As they carried Emma toward the exits, she saw something else that would haunt her dreams for years to come. A figure watching from an upper window across the courtyard, silhouetted against the London night. Even at that distance, she could see his smile, cold and satisfied, and utterly without remorse. James Kipper had gotten exactly what he wanted: the performance, the drama, the knowledge that he'd orchestrated every move in their desperate dance. Emma was safe, but he was still out there, still playing his game, already planning the next act in his theater of cruelty. The timer reached 0 as they cleared the building, but instead of an explosion, speakers crackled to life throughout the abandoned school. Well played, Inspector Henley. Until next time. Then silence, and the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness of London, a monster wearing a human face was already choosing his next victim. Chapter 8. The Long Game. 3 months after the events at St. Bartholomew's School, Detective Chief Inspector Patricia Henley sat in her office at New Scotland Yard, staring at a wall covered with photographs, maps, and red string connecting incidents across 4 countries. The James Kipper case had evolved from a missing person inquiry into something much larger and more terrifying, a hunt for a ghost who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. Emma Hartwell had survived, physically at least. The doctors said her injuries would heal, that the physical trauma would fade with time and proper care. But Henley had seen the look in Emma's eyes during the debriefing sessions, the way she flinched at unexpected sounds and checked locks obsessively. Some wounds went deeper than flesh, and James Kipper had carved his initials into Emma's soul with surgical precision. Another one, Gov. Detective Sergeant Flynn entered without knocking, carrying a manila folder that had become as familiar as breathing. Rebecca Morrison, 26, marketing assistant from Edinburgh, went to meet a client calling himself J. Cooper last Tuesday. Haven't seen her since. Henley took the file with weary resignation. Cooper, another tool name, another alias in Kipper's expanding repertoire. The pattern was becoming sickeningly familiar. Young professional women, mysterious appointments, clients who didn't exist. He'd refined his methodology since London, learned from their investigation, adapted his approach to stay ahead of the pursuit. That makes 12 since Emma, Henley said, adding Rebecca's photograph to the wall. 12 women in 3 months, across England, Scotland, and now Wales. He's accelerating. It's like he's showing off, Flynn said, settling into the chair across from Henley's desk. Each abduction is more elaborate than the last, more clues, more games. The psychologist thinks he's addicted to the attention. Dr. Miranda Ashworth's psychological profile sat open on Henley's desk, its clinical language failing to capture the true horror of what they were dealing with. Kipper wasn't just a serial killer. He was a performance artist whose medium was human suffering, someone who treated murder like a chess game played across the landscape of Britain. The intercom buzzed, interrupting her dark thoughts. "Ma'am, there's a call for you on line 3. The caller says it's about the Kipper case." Henley and Flynn exchanged glances. In the months since Emma's rescue, they'd received hundreds of tips, sightings, and confessions from attention seekers and well-meaning civilians. But something in her secretary's voice suggested this call was different. DCI Henley speaking. "Good afternoon, Inspector. I trust you're well?" The voice was cultured, pleasant, utterly unremarkable, and instantly recognizable. Henley felt her blood turn to ice as she gestured frantically for Flynn to start the trace equipment. "James Kipper, I presume." "Oh, very good. Yes, though I prefer to think of myself as JK these days. More literary, don't you think? I've been following your investigation with great interest. You've become quite the celebrity in certain circles." Henley forced her voice to remain steady. "Where's Rebecca Morrison?" "Straight to business. I do admire that about you, Inspector. Rebecca is indisposed at the moment, but safe for now. I've grown quite fond of our little games, and I'd hate to end them prematurely." "What do you want?" "Want? How delightfully direct. I want what I've always wanted, to be understood. You see, Inspector, I've been reading about your background. Grammar school girl from Manchester, worked your way up through the ranks, dedicated your life to justice and truth and all those noble abstractions. We're not so different, you and I. We're nothing alike." Kipper's laugh was soft, genuinely amused. "Oh, but we are. We both understand that ordinary people are sheep, requiring shepherds to guide them through their meaningless little lives. The difference is that you've chosen to protect them, while I've chosen to improve them. By murdering them? By giving their lives meaning. Do you know what Emma Hartwell was before our encounter? A nobody. A faceless cog in the great machine of mediocrity. Now she's part of something larger, something that will be remembered long after both of us are dust. I've made her immortal." Henley fought the urge to scream obscenities into the phone. Flynn was working frantically at the trace equipment, but Kipper would be using multiple relays, bouncing the signal across half of Europe. They'd never pin down his location in time. "The families you've destroyed might disagree with your assessment. Families grieve for a while, then move on. It's what humans do: adapt, forget, replace. But legend endures, Inspector. 100 years from now, people will still tell stories about the man who called himself Kipper. Can you say the same about the victims?" I can say they were loved, that their lives had value beyond your twisted games. Sentiment, how utterly predictable. Kipper's voice carried a note of disappointment, as if she'd failed some crucial test. I had hoped you might understand the artistry involved, the careful planning, the aesthetic choices. Each abduction is a symphony, Inspector, and you're listening to nothing but noise. The trace signal was still jumping around the globe. London, Paris, Frankfurt, back to London. Wherever Kipper was calling from, he'd had months to prepare for this conversation. "Where is Rebecca Morrison?" Henley repeated. "Patience, Inspector. All will be revealed in due time. But I'm calling with a proposition. I'm growing tired of these provincial hunting grounds. Small cities, predictable patterns, it's all becoming rather mundane. I'm ready for a greater challenge. Such as London, of course, where it all began. I'm planning something special for the anniversary of our first meeting, a grand finale that will make all previous performances seem like mere rehearsals. You'll have one chance to stop me, Inspector. One chance to save a life that actually matters." The line went dead, leaving Henley staring at the receiver with a mixture of rage and dread. Flynn looked up from the trace equipment with defeat written across her face. Nothing. He was using a satellite relay system, probably mobile, could have been calling from anywhere. Henley hung up the phone and turned back to the wall of victims, studying the pattern of disappearances with new urgency. Kipper was coming back to London, back to where Emma Hartwell had nearly died, and he'd tasted the intoxicating rush of outwitting the police on their home ground. "Get me everything we have on significant dates related to the original case," she ordered. Emma's abduction, the discovery of the school, our first contact with Kipper. He's planning something for an anniversary, which means we have a timeline. As Flynn hurried out to coordinate with the research team, Henley remained alone with the photographs and the weight of knowing that somewhere in Britain, a woman named Rebecca Morrison was living through hell while her captor planned an encore performance. The game was entering its final act, and James Kipper had just raised the stakes higher than ever before. Outside her window, London stretched away into the evening darkness, 8 million people going about their ordinary lives with no idea that a monster was returning to walk among them. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, and Henley found herself counting the tolls like a countdown to some unimaginable catastrophe. The hunt for James Kipper had become something more than a police investigation. It was a battle for the soul of a city, a test of whether justice could triumph over chaos when the enemy was intelligent enough to turn the very system against itself. And somewhere in the labyrinth of London's streets, a predator was already choosing his next victim, planning the move that would either cement his legend or finally bring his reign of terror to an end. The game was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.